I think he's got until May.
No way.
I feel like right around May they're going to pull him.
No way.
Yeah.
And Newsom comes in.
I think he just has health problems, and then the country understands, and Newsom is going to have his support fully, and Kamala is going to like, I don't want to be president. I'm cool with being vice president.
Well, the big prediction there from podcaster Joe Rogan, who says that Joe Biden has until May before the Democratic Party will pull him from the race. Now, we are just shy of 7 months away from November's 2024 presidential election, where it's looking like it's going to be a repeat showdown between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But what if Joe Rogan is right and the Democrats are set to oust the president from even attempting to secure a second term? Here to discuss this with me is TalkTV commentator Joe Concha. Joe, what did you think about this prediction from Joe Rogan? Do you think he's onto something here?
I think in theory, I can go along with it, that in May, Joe Biden will be replaced by California Governor Gavin Newsom, because obviously Biden is 81 years old and not exactly aging like a fine wine. It's more like the cottage cheese type presidency as far as Biden's decline that's happening in real time in public. But I just can't see logistically how you get a sitting president off the stage. And he may not want to go, by the way. People kind of forget that. You can't just order Joe Biden, hey, we're going to take the keys now. I don't know if you ever tried to take car keys from grandpa when he hits his 80s and suddenly is driving into bushes and trees. But it ain't an easy process. You need the jaws of life to get those keys out. And the same thing with Joe Biden, that he may not want to leave, say, I got some unfinished business, I got to protect democracy from Trump, or whatever argument that he's saying. And then you'd have to get Gavin Newsom on the ballot in all 50 states. And then Newsom would actually have to introduce himself to the entire country and have the type of name brand recognition that a sitting president has, and maybe Gavin Newsom does not. So I get the theory, but I just don't see in reality how this possibly could be pulled off.
No, it's definitely not Joe Biden leading this course. I think this is all happening, behind the scenes. But, you and I have spoken about Gavin Newsom, but what do you think it is about the California governor that would be, enticing for him to run as a spare part, I guess?
Hair, Maddie, and teeth. Those two things is what drives Gavin Newsom. He's a good-looking guy. He's in his 50s. He's not in his 80s. So youth as well, relatively anyway. But then when you peel off that onion and you look at Gavin Newsom's record in California, for starters, his approval is at an all-time low in the state. So even people in his own state don't think he's doing particularly a good job. California currently, right now in the United States, has the highest tax rate in the country as far as income taxes. He has the highest homeless rate, the highest poverty rate. More people are leaving California in cities like San Francisco than any other state and city in the country for places like Florida and Texas and Tennessee, which are run by Republican governors. So if the bumper sticker that Gavin Newsom is running on, Maddie, is let's make America California, not many people are going to sign up for high taxes, high crime, high homelessness, and overall a state that even people, and it's a beautiful state, I was there last year, are leaving in droves because they can't afford it or they just don't feel safe anymore. So Gavin Newsom is good on paper and looks good in a campaign ad. But then once you look at what he actually will do for the country as far as his policies, I'm not sure many independents, the type that you need to win in swing states, would be very comfortable with that.
No, he's certainly not liked, but I think that a lot of people were worried when he was sent to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping, which was quite bizarre to be sending the California governor to meet with one of America's probably biggest competitors. But you and I will get into Kamala Harris in a minute. Regardless of her, is there anyone else in the Democratic Party that could step up in the event that, the White House does want to replace Biden ahead of the election?
It's hard to see anybody else who is on the bench that could just step in and then you could say, yeah, I could see that person as president. Usually that's the vice president, right? In terms of Kamala Harris, that's always been the natural progression. Richard Nixon was vice president under Dwight D. Eisenhower, and he then ran for president after Eisenhower's term was over, lost to John F. Kennedy, eventually did win the presidency 8 years later. George H.W. Bush was vice president under Ronald Reagan. He runs after Reagan's 8 years, he wins the presidency. Al Gore ran after Bill Clinton. Joe Biden ran 4 years later, but after Barack Obama. Kamala Harris should be the number one choice, but she's polling lower than Joe Biden and has an authenticity and likability problem. So that isn't the person you can go to. The only other name I hear is Gretchen Whitmer, who is the governor of Michigan. But again, I don't think a lot of people really know Gretchen Whitmer outside of her own state. So that whole process of getting up to speed as far as who she is. And by the way, I don't think Democratic voters would like it very much that we held all these primary elections in all these different states, and now we're just going to throw that out the window and insert somebody in as the nominee. That's what they do in communist countries, not in a democracy like the United Kingdom or the United States of America. So this whole notion of, okay, we'll just take the Michigan governor, the California governor, and we'll take out Biden and put that person in like a chess piece, I don't think voters will be very happy about, quite frankly.
Well, Joe, on the note of Kamala Harris, it's looking like there will never be a world in which we see the Democratic Party promoting her. But do you think the party is kind of acting naive for thinking that Americans don't know that there could be a chance that, you know, she might have to take over Joe Biden in the event that they do have to enact the 25th Amendment? I mean, Nikki Haley, her entire campaign was a vote for Joe Biden, is a vote for Kamala Harris. And, you know, you can't be naive in thinking that this might be a possibility. So do you think that they're just ignoring the fact that Americans aren't thinking this?
They're putting their head in the sand, Maddie, hoping that that scenario never is thought about by voters as we go into this election. If I were the Trump campaign, I'd have an ad out every day with some sort of awkward gaffe that Kamala Harris makes whenever she speaks anytime outside of a teleprompter and say, okay, that's the person that could have the nuclear codes if something happens to Joe Biden. And look, the average lifespan of an American male is under 80 years old. I think it's 79 years old. Joe Biden's 81. If he were to win, he would be 86 years old and still be in the Oval Office in a job that you got to travel a lot. Obviously, you don't really, now in Joe Biden's case, he does take a lot of days off, but overall, not the type of job that any 80-year-old should have at this point. And Kamala Harris would be plan B. She would be the backup. And we see her in public speaking engagements where she has this odd cackle that she doesn't really connect with people in any major way. And quite frankly, her one big job as vice president was to secure the U.S. southern border. And obviously now we've had 10 million people cross during this presidency alone, including those hundreds on the terror watch list that is held by the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. So if we're looking at her record or looking at the fact that she just can't really connect with people, there's an awkwardness to her, an authenticity problem that she has that's a real issue. And the fact that she could be commander-in-chief of our armed forces is something that the Trump campaign absolutely should be driving home, because the Biden campaign doesn't want to talk about that aspect.
I mean, it was quite bizarre to be, you know, instating Kamala as the border czar, and then, you know, she only visited once in about June 2021, I think it was, when she went to El Paso. And it was very much out of sight, out of mind, which is a very weird thing for the Biden administration to do when the border security had become the biggest issue, still is probably the biggest issue facing, you know, the Democratic Party. But on the note of where the administration is at right now, how do you think Joe Biden's re-election campaign is going?
It's going very slowly. He doesn't do a lot of events. There aren't any big rallies or crowds. But then the Biden campaign looks back on 2020, where they used COVID as an excuse and kept him in a basement just doing interviews with very friendly outlets and once in a while getting out and speaking to voters. And that worked because obviously he won. It's a different deal this time around because Joe Biden has a record that he has to run on. He has to explain to people why their food prices are up nearly 40% since he took office. He has to explain to people why crime is out of control in major American cities, and people that get arrested are back out in the street within a couple of hours, including those who are here illegally. We had two murders that happened in the United States recently that happened on the University of Georgia campus. 22-year-old Laken Riley was beaten to death by an illegal immigrant that was here from Venezuela and had a prior arrest record here in the United States. And then we had Ruby Garcia in Michigan, 25-year-old, who was shot several times by an illegal immigrant and left to die on the side of a road. So he has to defend all of these things, and foreign policy, by the way, which we barely talked about, as far as Israel and his wavering support around that war, and then Ukraine sending hundreds of billions of dollars to a war that 5 years from now, Maddie, we could be talking about the stalemate in eastern Ukraine that continues to go on as thousands, hundreds of thousands continue to die. So overall, Biden has a record that he has to run on, and he can't hide this time like he did in 2020. But then the downside to putting Biden out there in these public places is that you're going to have to do a rhetorical cleanup on aisles 5, 17, and 24 every time he speaks outside of scripted remarks. So I guess they're just trying to play it safe and put all the attention on Donald Trump, which our media will do, and his legal problems, because when Trump talks policy, he's on the right side of policy when it comes to immigration, the border, crime, inflation, and foreign policy, and has a record of himself to run on as well from 2017 to 2021, which was a darn good one when you take the COVID aspect out of it, which I think any American president would have struggled with.
Well, Joe, you're right, but I think that Biden's team can only kind of hide him in the shadows for so long, because we're 7 months away from the election, and anyone who follows, a presidential election knows it's a grueling process. There is a lot of traveling. There is a lot of campaigns, as we know. And in 2020, as you said, it was easier because we're in COVID. And that's obviously where that, Biden is campaigning from the basement kind of slogan came from. But he's now, he's nearly, in November, he will be 82 years old. And it's going to be a taxing process for the next 7 months. He actually does have to get out there, and he does need to campaign against Trump and, have debates and be going to small towns and exactly discussing about, how he's going to handle foreign security, how he's going to handle, the rising prices of everything in the United States. So I wonder how he will be able to handle that while also trying to deter any media away from his, dwindling decline.
Enthusiasm is what wins elections behind a candidate, and Trump clearly has that right now. Biden, not so much. 3/4 of Americans don't even want him running for a second term, including a majority of Democrats. So you brought up debates before. I'm willing to bet right now, here in April of 2024, that when the fall comes around and we usually have 3 presidential debates, that Joe Biden will find a way, or his team will anyway, not to put him on that stage for 90 minutes outside of a teleprompter when his record will really come into focus. They'll use some sort of excuse that, well, Trump is a guy who led an insurrection against democracy in this country, therefore we shouldn't give him the platform of 70, 80 million people watching and normalizing him. The president is above speaking to this man directly, therefore we're going to keep Biden on the sidelines. So I have a feeling that those debates won't happen. I think ultimately that will hurt Joe Biden because he'll look like a coward, quite frankly. And overall, as far as campaigning, we see dribs and drabs of it here and there, but you got to show the American people you want the job. And when you're going on vacation every weekend to your multi-million-dollar beach house in Delaware or running off to Camp David instead of doing the work, I think ultimately that's going to be his downfall, while Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States.
I do think it's going to be a situation where the debates, there's endless excuses as to why he can't debate. It's not even about, him not wanting to go up against Trump. I think it just looks so poorly on anyone running for president if you can't even get up and debate your opponent when you're wanting the job of sitting in a room against Xi Jinping, against maybe potentially Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un. It's not a good look for anyone who wants the biggest job in the world. But Joe, Concha, thank you so much for your time today.
Maddie, always a pleasure. Thank you.